Death is inevitable. We all know that. And as a result, we often find it in modern media. My name is Grant, and today we're doing a totally not crash course about death in Sula. Sula by Toni Morrison is a novel full of death. In every chapter, either someone or something dies, whether that something is metaphorical or it's the main frickin' character. Today, we were looking at the circumstances of those deaths, as well as what they mean in the context of the novel.
Over there, send the word over there.
In 1919, the first chapter of Sula, we're introduced to Shadrach, who was a former soldier and who served during World War I. Being a soldier, he witnessed many deaths, but one that stays with him after the war comes when a fellow soldier is running along and gets shot in the head twice, ripping his head off. But the body of the headless soldier ran on, with energy and grace, ignoring altogether the drip and slide of brain tissue down its back. The witnessing of this event leaves Shadrach traumatized. The soldier continues to run, just as Shadrach continues to try to live life, even though the man has lost his head and Shadrach has lost his sanity.
Hurry, 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 take the train.
Chapter 2. Cecil Sabat is Helen's mother and Nell's grandmother. When Helen gets word that her mother is sick and possibly dying, she decides to go on a long, uncomfortable, and frankly dangerous train trip to visit her mother, hopefully before she dies. On top of this, she decides to bring Nell along with her, who will be leaving the bottom for the first and last time. After an arduous journey, Nell and Helen arrive only to find that Cecil is already dead, and that the journey they made was for nothing, or at least it appears the journey was for nothing. Because when they get back, Nell realizes in a moment of sad irony her individuality. She repeats the word, me, and declares that she wants to travel the world. This is both sad and ironic, because we know by now that the trip was to see her already dead grandmother, and that she would never again leave the bottom. In 1921, Boy leaves Ava, even after being married and having 3 kids. As he leaves, the marriage dies, and so does Ava's love. Rikus, Hannah's husband, died when Sula was just 3 years old. After Rikus' death, Hannah expresses complete sexual freedom, but she never gets emotionally attached. She would pass this trait down to her daughter, Sula. The final death of the chapter comes when Ava decides to burn Plum, who, since returning from war, has become a heroin addict. Plum viewed the pouring of kerosene as some kind of baptism, some kind of blessing, he thought. Everything's going to be all right, it said, and Ava viewed the burning as mercy to Plum. The fire would be a cleanser for Plum. Plum's death would make the reader ask themselves if putting Plum out of misery justifies the murder.
It was a recipe for disaster.
Moving on to the 4th chapter and what is arguably the most important death of the novel, Chicken Little. Here's what happens. Sula and Nell are playing by a river when suddenly a boy comes along and asks to play with them. Sula helps him climb a tree, and when he gets back down, she decides to spin him around by holding his hands. This is all very fun until Sula loses her grips and watches as Chicken Little flies into the river and drowns. Following this, Sula panicked that someone had seen and runs to hide in Shadrach's house, where she meets him, gets scared, and runs out, leaving only a belt. This death is a turning point in the novel, and that is something that both Nell and Sula carry with them for the rest of their lives. To start, his accidental death further drives the loss of childhood innocence. It shows Sula and Nell how easy it is to die. They grow up and thus are no longer protected by the childhood sense of their own immortality. Later at the funeral, Sula realizes that she does not feel guilty in the same way that afflicts Nell. It is possible that Shadrach's assurance of her own permanence relieves her fears that Chicken Little's accidental death has changed her good nature in any fundamental way. Nell, on the other hand, feels plenty guilty, and this guilt arises partly from her upbringing. Later in the novel, though, we learn that she was thrilled when she saw Chicken Little sailing through the air. She remained calm when Sula became distraught. It is likely because she feels guilty about her lack of reaction, or the lack of her socially acceptable reaction to the accident. Although Sula and Nell's actions following Chicken Little's death may be reprehensible, you have to remember that they are still children. They didn't want to harm the boy. They were too afraid to tell anyone about the accident for fear that they would be blamed for intending to kill him. The accident seems to be, on the surface, not to have afflicted them much, but later in chapters reveal that the death had a profound influence on them. Instinctively, they know that it is possible that society will misunderstand the accident and blame them for something they didn't really do. In contrast, the reaction of the white world to Chicken Little's death is clearly reprehensible. The white officials consider the matter of returning the boy's body to his family an annoyance. Lastly, we compare the attitude of the boy's death to that of Sula and Nell. There is a clear difference between them. Sula grieves and Nell feels guilty, while the white man feels nothing.
I fell into a ring of fire. I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the
Now, in the next
flames
chapter,
went higher.
Hannah, mother of Sula, makes an early departure from the novel. Her influence on Sula, though, remains constant and profound. By sleeping with her friends' husbands, Hannah teaches Sula to regard sex as pleasant and frequent, but otherwise unremarkable. Hannah ripples with sex, and as she seems quite happy without a husband, she also doesn't seem particularly concerned about being a good mother to Sula. She tells her friends that she loves her daughter but doesn't really like her. It's not clear what we should make of Hannah. Should we dislike her for sleeping around and for neglecting Sula? What does she tell us about marriage and propriety, happy as she is without either? Hannah's death further complicates these questions. Sula watches her mother die in a fire, but we never hear any grief on Sula's part. Is Hannah being punished, or is the fire somehow redemptive? We never get the answers to these questions. Many of Hannah's qualities emerge in Sula as an adult. Perhaps this is a commentary on the legacy that mothers pass on to their daughters. It is left up to the reader to decide what to make of Hannah's death, and it could be any of the aforementioned things, or something completely different. In the next few chapters, it is not people that die per se, but relationships, dreams, and other metaphysical things. And we have to make time for the important stuff later, so speedrun. Okay, let's go. In chapter 1927, we find that Jude dreams of leaving his mark on the world and working on the new road. These dreams quickly die when it is revealed that the construction team is not hiring black workers, even if they are more capable of the job. In 1937, Sula returns to the bottom, foreshadowed by a plague of robins, and Sula and Nell begin to once more spend time together. One day, when Jude returns home and complains to Nell about some minor annoyance at his job, Sula teases him. Irritated, he comments that her birthmark looks like a snake. This early animosity, though, leads to an affair. After Nell discovers the affair by stumbling on Sula and Jude having sex, Jude abandons Nell and their children. This leaves Nell devastated by the betrayal of her husband and best friend, and leads to the death of the relationship, for now. In the next chapter, not much in the way of death happens. There is drought, and the perceived evil of Sula helps the town band together. I bet that'll last a long time, but there is not much more. And done. Whew.
I wanna stop it, but like it too much to let it stop here. It's wrong, but I want it tonight. It was not my own volition, but I fell in deep by running the distance I've been advised to keep. I trot
Now to another death that is arguably the most important, and that is the death of one of our main characters and the namesake of the novel, Sula herself. The community of the bottom regards Sula's death as a good omen. They go to the burial to verify for themselves that the witch is indeed in the ground. At first, her passing seems to herald good things. There are rumors that black workers will be hired for the construction of the tunnel under the bridge. There are also plans to build a new nursing home, which will house both black and white patients, including Ava, Sula's grandmother. However, a devastating frost overtakes the area, destroying crops and killing livestock. Many people cannot even get into Medallion, so they lose several days of much-needed wages. The bitter cold snap brings in its wake a host of illnesses. The community begins to suffer from Sula's passing in other ways as well. Without her evil influence to rally them together, the moral righteousness inspired in the townspeople begins to crumble. Mothers beat their children, wives cease to cherish their husbands as they did when Sula was alive, and with the death of Sula came the death of the community, and it only gets worse. Welcome to chapter 1941. This year's National Suicide Day is celebrated by many of the townspeople, much to Shadrach's amazement. Scores of people turn out to follow him, stuttering, skipping, marching, and shuffling their way through town to the tunnel on the New River Road. There, in a frenzy of mob anger and frustration, because of the tunnel construction have been given to whites rather than blacks, For so many years, the townspeople scramble over the barricade and plunder the construction site. Their fevered pitch of joy and revenge rages, fed by years of oppression, lost wages, and the poverty that they have come to accept as a way of life. Suddenly, the tunnel collapses in a wall of water, ice, and mud, killing many of the townspeople. While Shadrach stands high on the riverbank, ringing his bell, the tunnel, which initially symbolized freedom from the grips of poverty and bigotry, betrays the townspeople. Ironically, Shadrach reluctantly leads those who rejoiced over Sula's death to the quintessential celebration of National Suicide Day. He stands high on the riverbank like a prophet ringing his bell on Judgment Day as he beholds the terrified flock of his community in a scene of sacrifice and judgment. Death happens in many ways and forms. People never want to accept it, but is a part of human life. Everyone experiences birth, growth, and death. It is a natural aspect of life. Toni Morrison describes and focuses on this theme of death because death is very powerful in everyday life. It teaches people to have the power of love and empathy, but most of all, the power of acceptance. Even though death will always be there, and it might be hard to accept it, it can bring new meaning to life and open a path for moral exploration. Cecil Sabat. That's not what I start with? Okay. Jesus Christ. Even after being married for 3... I did it again. Why? Why?
Wait.
Even after being married, having 3 kids. Yeah, that'll... 1921, Ava doesn't... viewed the pouring of kerosene as some kind of baptism. Same kind of thing, he thought. Here's what happens. Sell. Christ.
Sell, my favorite.
Sel and Nula. What does she tell us about marriage and propriety? Alright. Departure from the novel. Her influence on Sula.
To Tugboat.
Got that one on camera.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, in the next chapter, Hannah, mother of Sula, makes an early departure from the novel. Her influence on Sula, though... I did again! Sula!
Who is Sula?
Who is Sula? Sula! It's not Shola. It's not Sula. Sula. Dreams and other metaphysical things. Why did I say metaphysical?
You said metaphysical.
Metaphysical.
My favorite word.
Everything.
Spoon. What do you mean?
When a spoonerism was when you take like a name and like you flip the first letter of the initials. So I would be like Hrant Garkins.
That's what that's called?
I think it's called a spoonerism. That's what Tim says anyways.
Who's Tim?
My father. He's a relatively intelligent person. Got that one on camera.
There's a drought.
There's a drought. The perceived evil of death. This is not death nowhere in that sentence. Nowhere in that entire... Oh, there's once in the paragraph. Oh, okay.
The perceived evil of death.
The perceived evil of death. Excellent work. Right. I love refrigerators. In the next chapter, it is not much in the way of death happening here. There is drought and perceived evil.
There is not much in the way of death happening here.
There is drought.
There is drought.
Oh, God. After 1930s... Oh. In the chapter 1927, we find that Jude dreams of dreaming his work on the namesake of the novel, Sula herself. The community of the bottom regards the communism of the bottom. The novel Sula herself. All right. Okay. Now on to another death. I did another death. Now on to another. Another? Is that so hard to say? Another? Another? Christ. Now on to another death. Can I say another? I'm just like stopping, or am I actually mispronouncing?
I don't think you're mispronouncing it. I think
Okay.
you just have it messed up in your head.
Okay. Aye. 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 That's how you say another. Yeah. That'll do it. Alright. Okay. Shuffling their way through town to the tunnel of the new river road. There is a
To tunnel.
to the town to the tunnel. What did I say? To the town again? To the town on the new river road?
No, it says through the town to the tunnel on the New River Road.
Through the town
To the tunnel.
to the tunnel.
Through the town
To the tunnel. Alright. On the team of death.
What is the team of death?
Well, you got the Grim Reaper. Like, he's the stud. He's the real carry. I don't know. He's the primary object. He's the main man.
It's the MVP.
He's definitely the MVP. Team Death.
Team death.
Woo woo.
Woo woo. Alright.
Even through death. Death is. Bruh. That's a bruh moment right there. That's a real bruh.
And that is a wrap.
Boogie time.
Boogie time.
Boogie time.
Boogie time.
Boogie time.
You dance when you're done with shooting.
I guess so. Boogieing down. Boogie down. Boogie down. Boogie down. Boogie down. Boogie down to death.
Boogie down to death.
Yeah.
Hey, we're done then.
Yeah.
And